Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is Kelly Phillips. I'm the Membership Development Manager here at TechNX, and TechNX is a not-for-profit association. We're currently in our 40th year of operation. As an association, we're focused on being a support community for businesses within the tech industry. So TechNX is actually the leader in peer-to-peer programming, and we run a series of peer groups every month with a strong focus on personal, professional, and business growth. And our sessions are where people can connect with other business leaders, share best practices and business insights, learn from others who might have or are experiencing similar challenges, and hopefully grow your business. So if you're interested in attending a peer group, please reach out to myself, or you see my colleague here, Ryan Ellis, as well. At this time, I'd really like to thank Vaughan Economic Development for your support and help in organizing the event. And also a big thank you to Julie Flesh at City of Vaughan there for helping coordinate the panelists as well. This is a series that we're putting together, and our next series is going to be on the future of financial tech. We're currently finalizing all of the details, but that date is looking like it's going to be Wednesday, June the 8th, and it'll be the same thing at 12 p.m. So at this time, I'd really like to introduce our panelists. I'm just going to go through quickly and say their names, and then they'll do a little brief introduction of themselves. So we have Colin Hung, who's the healthcare advisor at ventureLAB. We have Lauren Leon. She is the strategy manager at Mackenzie Health, and David Van Slingerland. He's the CEO at Sterling Industries. Lauren, I'm going to start with you. If you just give yourself a brief introduction and a little bit on your background.
Sure, sounds great. So hi everyone, and great to be here with all of you today. So as Kelly mentioned, I'm the manager of strategy at Mackenzie Health. So really supporting the hospital from a number of perspectives. So obviously based on the title, supporting some of our strategy work and a lot of process improvement, project management across the organization. Also closely involved in our Ontario health team's work. So really working with health system transformation and how we can improve integrated care within the region. And that's really focused on the Vaughan, King, and Richmond Hill communities. And then the last piece is oversight around our Mackenzie Innovation Institute. So how we can bring innovation in. So definitely a high link to technology, but also just new and different ways of doing things within the hospital to really advance on the innovation front. So that's just a little bit about me and the type of work that I do right now.
Excellent, thank you. David, how about yourself?
So my name is David Van Slingerland. I'm the CEO of Sterling Industries. Sterling is a vertically integrated contract manufacturer. We only do medical devices. The other thing is we are the lead medtech partner with ventureLAB now, and we'll be hosting a medtech lab in our facility in conjunction with the ventureLAB folks. So we're very excited about that. We service clients from the Fortune 100s to mid-size OEMs, and more excitingly, we're also supporting fast-growing scale-ups. So we see a variety of technologies. We're asked to build them on behalf of our clients, and so it gives us a broad range of knowledge and challenges, actually, that we see in the medtech space. And prior to this, I was an IT executive for some large Canadian companies. So as the convergence of IT, Internet of Things and health tech starts to find its way into the med tech space, it gives me also a unique perspective from that perspective.
Thank you. And then Colin, yourself.
Hi, yeah, I'm Colin. I represent ventureLAB, which is an innovation hub located here in York Region, where we help small businesses, entrepreneurs, scaling companies to grow and scale their businesses here in the region and across Canada. I specialize in helping companies that are in the healthcare space, so that's digital health, medical devices, and so forth. And I help with advisory services along with my wonderful colleagues at ventureLAB who do the same thing. Just by way of personal background, I've been in healthcare for probably about 20 years now. Most of that was in the marketing function for a lot of digital health companies here based in Canada, helping them expand overseas and into the US. I'm also currently an editor or for the last 5 years, I've been an editor at a publication called Healthcare IT Today. It's a fancy way of saying I get to go to a lot of conferences and speak to a lot of people and meet a lot of CEOs and keep my fingers on the pulse of what's going on in healthcare.
Excellent. Well, thanks. We have a great wealth of knowledge here with everybody. So I'm going to dive into a few of the questions here and let everybody answer them as as they see and some of the information. Oops, sorry, I was just trying to mute someone. So in terms of piloting new solutions, being able to train users, ensuring cybersecurity, accessibility, there's a lot going on when you're thinking of some different things. So this is kind of a two-part question. So what are the challenges associated with the adoptions of new technologies by healthcare providers? And then what technology challenges does the healthcare industry face? So Colin, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. Well, there's so many challenges, right? But I think I'll answer the question this way. I think one of the challenges that people don't realize or don't recognize about healthcare is how important the technology has to fit within the existing workflow of healthcare clinicians. A lot of times what entrepreneurs will do is want to say, well, we want to disrupt the way people do things. And that's really a good approach for the administrative side of healthcare. But on the clinical side, that's actually not a good thing to disrupt how people do things with patients, because they're based on tried and true methodologies that have been taught in med school. And these are the ways that they have to do things, or they need to do things. So it's really important that when you're introducing new technology in healthcare, that it goes with exactly how the clinician wants to do their work. It flows with their workflow. I've seen too many times how a challenge where you try to implement something that's going to disrupt that workflow, and it causes all sorts of havoc inside the organization. And in the end, those products can be uninstalled, or a competitor will come in who is better at integrating with the workflow of the clinicians. So I would say that's probably the one thing that I see most often, is that technologies get implemented or don't get implemented because they weren't really conforming to the way that clinicians really want to work. So that's hyper important in healthcare.
That's a good way of putting it, because a lot of times we're so focused right now on technologies disrupting things. And this is definitely an industry where you have to make sure that you're able to enhance things instead of totally disrupt. David, what are your thoughts on some of the challenges associated with adopting new technologies?
So I'll take a little bit different tack from Colin. I'll talk about devices specifically, because that's what we do a lot of. So where we've seen success is devices that have a strong clinical mandate. So a champion, typically a chief medical officer or a doctor leading what the device is intended, its intended use. The other thing is you got to do your homework up front and really cover all the stakeholder groups. So don't just try to satisfy the clinicians. You also need to satisfy nursing, administration, et cetera. And the last thing is go wide and deep. No two hospitals, I think, they could be using the same software and the same workflow, but they do things differently. Even something, we've seen customers that have a sterile device, and the procedure by which that device is introduced into the sterile field in an operating room it varies from hospital to hospital, and frankly from clinician to clinician. So you really have to do your homework so that you're not just appealing to a thin sliver of the market. You really need to ensure that it will be widely adopted, and sometimes getting a different viewpoint will inform you as to maybe how you want your device to work a little differently.
Okay, perfect. And then Lauren, kind of flowing into the actual hospital system. So what are some of the challenges that you're seeing the healthcare industry facing, and then especially when you're adopting new technologies?
Yes, for sure. So kind of to build on some of these points, and I think really emphasize the people side, since that they're the ones using this technology. So obviously with any technology, really making sure that people understand what their role is and are able to support the change associated with it is really important. Starting from getting them to understand the value, and I think to hit on David and Colin's points, to it really that it needs to connect to their workflows and be very clear. And it's not always a one size fits all approach with every type of organization. Really being able to kind of customize or connect it to the groups so that they know how to use it, that it's embedded into operations, and there's a way to kind of sustain whatever is taken on as well. So kind of throughout a whole process, really making sure that end users are involved. If you're in a design phase or testing something out in early days, making sure that there's a lot of opportunities for input, or if it's just a matter of developing workflows, that end users are really a part of that, so they can be kind of brought along that change management journey. And then really having the right training and supports for adoption and very clear accountabilities or standards of work, so that this can be something that sticks. And then the one thing I'll highlight really around what is the big challenge today is really going back to the massive system challenge of health human resource pressures. So with any of these, you need people to implement, and the biggest challenge is just that there are not many people readily available to take on enhancements associated with technology to implement any of these things. There is work required, and while it does or is often kind of brought in to create efficiencies or do things differently, that upfront lift to get some of this work done is really can be a challenge. And when people are balancing that with needing to be able to just provide this standard care that they need to, operating it with a smaller team or kind of fighting a lot of fires along the way, I'd say that's one of the biggest challenges in the current environment that would really kind of significantly impacts the capacity or willingness of a lot of organizations to take on some of this new type of work.
Perfect, thank you. I think some of the suggestions and some of the things that you've said lead into and answer a little bit of the next question here, but I think this is a little bit of a different spin on it. Recognizing that the tolerance for risk is much lower in the healthcare industry. And I think we even said it's not even that it's much lower, it's almost non-existent, because it's people's lives that you're dealing with. Solutions often need to integrate with other technologies within the system right now that require both practitioners and administrators to be proficient with them. And Lauren, you just said, it's not always having the capacity for people to do this. This is a two-part question as well. What are factors that entrepreneurs and companies need to keep in mind when developing and commercializing? And what are strategies that can be employed to ensure that solutions can be adopted and implemented effectively? David, how about I start with you?
Okay, so many different ways I could go with this, but again, I'm big on homework, as you can tell, or as you'll be able to tell. I think as you start to develop a device, you really need to understand the regulatory environment that will govern its implementation. And really, what does the finish line look like? If you're doing a class 2 or higher device and you need a pre-market notification, a 510K with the FDA as an example, you need to understand what that really looks like and what hurdles you need to jump over to get your device accepted. You also want to use appropriate medical device development techniques. Don't just rely on the system requirement specs. Obviously, that talks about how the device should work in the environment, but you also need to have a design FEMA or a failure mode analysis. You need risk analyses. You need design history files. If you're doing software, if you've got a software-driven system, you need to document and develop the software using appropriate guidelines, et cetera. And where possible, surround yourself with good partners that have been through it and done it, whether it be on the regulatory side, quality side, manufacturing side. That will certainly, smooth the way to getting your device accepted.
Okay, thank you. Those are some great suggestions there. Lauren, how about yourself when somebody's approaching you about new devices, new ideas?
Yes, for sure. So I think the first piece to highlight here, I think, is, I'll say in a simple way, really making sure that there's a clear and unique kind of value proposition. So in my role, I get a lot of requests of we have this new technology and kind of the standard pitch deck that you might expect. And frankly, a lot of the things I look at all kind of seem the same to be the same type of service offering, or it's not really clear what would be new or unique about some of those pieces. So I think being really targeted and to hit around some of David's point on doing your homework, the other thing I would add is from a customer perspective, really taking the time to understand what are their needs. So if you're kind of going into a meeting with a provider, it's not just about the standard pitch, it's about really understanding what are the unique needs and how can you tailor to that particular group. And on that, to really hit on or emphasize some of the risks. So I think one is just the risk of tech overload. So we know technology has a lot of great opportunities in today's world, but we also have 100 opportunities knocking at the door, and many systems, devices, et cetera, already in place within an organization. So it almost becomes overwhelming of how much more can you add and how can you expect people to know how to use all of these different pieces. And if it's something that's patient facing, will that make them confused by all the names of the types of things they're expected to connect to, even if you move more to things like the patient portal side or devices that they're using. So it can be very complex, and I think being able to kind of manage that in an effective way is really important. And even things like integration, I think Kelly, you hit on there as well, of that's a standard expectation, but at the same time, there are often costs associated with integration to be able to build some of these things into the work, or building interfaces, whatever it may be. So while that's a feature that exists and is great, it's something that we as providers are always considering of, can we actually afford to maintain this cost, and is it worth it relative to what we're bringing to the table? So just another kind of key piece to consider on that front as well.
I imagine too, when you're trying to integrate some of these new systems, everybody's got to be able to learn this pretty easily, and you have to have the manpower for it. So I think, David, this is going to come back to something that I'm sure you're going to keep saying, is do your homework and try to understand exactly who it's impacting, exactly what's happening along the way as you go. Colin, yourself then, you're dealing with a lot of entrepreneurs who are having all of these exciting ideas and visions. So what are some of the things that you are seeing, and what are the factors that maybe they need to keep in mind?
Yeah, there's two things. One, everyone's touched on it already. Definitely integration with existing systems. The last thing any clinician or CIO at a hospital wants to do is implement a system that's siloed. We have enough of those already in healthcare. We're trying to actively get rid of them. So we want to adopt devices and software that connects with the existing electronic medical record or the electronic health record. We want something that already can integrate easily with the patient portal that we're using, or the patient texting solution that we're using. So whatever entrepreneurs create today must be able to connect with these other systems. We haven't done a very good job in healthcare creating standards of how to connect to those systems. There's HL7, there's FHIR, but not everyone has adopted those or standardized on those yet. But if you can, at least, you're one step ahead. So integration is number one. I would say that's probably the one thing that entrepreneurs should keep in mind. The second one I will say is security. You're dealing with patient data a lot of times in healthcare, and that is got a separate set of rules in terms of the protection and the levels of encryption that you need to adhere to or comply with. So you need to make sure that whatever you're building, it has got security baked in. It's not an afterthought. because hospitals today, especially in the US, are hyper aware, and in Canada, sorry, are hyper aware of the duty they have to protect that data, right? We hear about breaches all the time. There's a wall of shame in the US where breaches are put up on this website with the name of the organization who had the breach up there. Nobody wants to be on that list. And so you have to make sure that whatever solution you're building has got security as a, baked right into the design of it.
So would you say that's maybe one of the #1 priorities when you're looking at things?
Well, I think it depends who you're talking to. I think to Lauren's point before, I think if you're talking to the clinical side, the biggest factor would be, what is this how is this going to impact or not impact my clinical staff? Is this going to disrupt anything that they're doing? Yes or no? But I think if you talk to the IT group, yeah, #1 is security, right? Because they're the ones that are going to get blamed if something breaks and the names get exposed, right? So yeah, I think there's a lot more awareness now of security because of all the ransomware attacks that have been happening on healthcare and all the data breaches that are being so public. So yes, I think it's definitely a top priority, right behind staffing and HR issues.
Perfect. One of the things, and Lauren, you actually just touched on this a little bit, is especially when you're implementing or you're using new technologies, it has to be patient. There has to be an easy use for patients as well. And one of the things we're seeing is a growing aging population. So that is where obviously that is growing. There's a lot more effects there. How can technology impact the challenge of providing quality healthcare for a growing aging population? And I look at, maybe parents, grandparents that sometimes have a challenge using some of these things, but then even maybe what's the impact on the practitioners that are being able to help them out? So Lauren, I will start with you.
Sounds good. So I'll answer this from a couple different lenses. So taking a step outside the hospital world first, just to kind of the general population. So especially when looking at seniors, I think that there are many who have a level of technology proficiency, and I think being able to really leverage that to help them. Usually they may be people who are I'll deem them more healthy, but providing the opportunities or ways for them to actually manage health and stay healthy. So preventative approaches, if it's wearables and being able to monitor different aspects of their health and be able to kind of react or provide opportunities or on what they can actually do to support in managing that so that they stay out of the hospital world. And then there's also the more frail or complex seniors who tend to be those who need a lot more supports, but also of which are generally more challenged with technology as well. So I think on that front, really exploring solutions that are more simple. So not relying on user input to be able to manage, but more things that are alerting systems or reminders or that sort of thing to be able to support them. And then I think on that front, that's where it kind of really goes beyond patients too, to link to caregivers and the role and how it can support a patient's caregiver to support them in managing both their own health and that of a patient's as well. So I think there can definitely be a lot of preventative types of approaches, but knowing the patient audience in which you're working with is definitely a really important piece. And then definitely this kind of plays out in many ways in the hospital environment. So over 70% of our inpatients are seniors. So definitely a massive portion of the people that we serve. And often we see a number of common issues. So things like falls or pressure injuries from being in a bed too long or infections. So I think there's a lot of great technology opportunities that really help to address some of those areas and support seniors in those. So things like having smart beds or alerts that can bring providers to the table, being able to look at a deterioration index through AI or predictive analytics to be able to flag when patients need more supports and connect in providers. So basically many opportunities, some preventative, some when actually kind of receiving care that can really support this population.
Okay, thank you. Colin, yourself, especially dealing with entrepreneurs who are coming up with some ideas, and a lot of ideas come out of necessity or things that people have seen. So what are maybe some of the technology impacts that you're seeing with providing quality healthcare?
Yeah, so this whole care at home or care outside the four walls of a hospital movement is one of the hottest areas in healthcare, right? Even hospitals themselves are building facilities without any beds in them now, right? Because they want people to get care at home. We recognize that the home is a better place for people to heal and recover, and frankly cheaper, right, for the healthcare system to have people at home rather than in a bed in a ward somewhere. So this is a really great area to get into. And it's this really blurry line between consumer side technologies and sort of traditional healthcare technologies, right? On the consumer side, we have a lot of things now with dealing with wearables, right, that can track your heart rate and maybe monitor, whether or not, if your elderly parents are actually moving around in their house, right, or have they fallen, and sensors baked into the walls or the floors, or maybe they're wearing a pendant that they can press a button and get help with. And so all these kinds of technologies are very exciting. And then on the other side, you have true remote patient monitoring type of devices, right? You have things that people will take home like Holters and other things to actually monitor properly an EKG at the house, to actually infuse medications to somebody who may be in a bed at the home. Maybe have PSW come in, and all, so there's just some tremendous opportunities in these areas. It's definitely very exciting, and it's an exciting and lucrative area when Best Buy has created a whole division called Best Buy Health that's dedicated to nothing but selling into this area. So it's definitely a very hot zone. I think, again, to David's earlier point, just do your homework. Like, just because you've experienced that problem, and it's not to say it's not a legitimate problem, make sure that it is actually a problem that needs to be solved for multiple patients and multiple people, right? I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs create a solution to a problem they had, only to find out that they were in the minority of having that one problem.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think they say that with everything, even when you're trying to build new products for customers in any industry, make sure that it's not just a specific problem, because then you get honed into that one solution there. David, yourself, when, especially in the manufacturing side and working with companies that are creating all of this, what are some of the impacts that you're seeing?
I think, so a lot of what Lauren and Colin talked about, I was going to talk about, but
they stole your answer.
No, I'm just going to say what they said was a great thing. But I guess the other thing is understanding that today's care models are integrated, and how do you share information from provider to provider? So you could have PSWs, you could have 3 shifts of them, depending on how infirm the patient is. You have obviously primary caregivers. You have caregivers doing diagnostic tests, et cetera. So how do you share that data across all your integrated care model? That's one thing that we're seeing. But it's also, as I said, the wearables world and the ability to provide a continuous window of vital statistics. And, I think Lauren talked about AI being used to understand changes in patient well-being, whether for the good or for the worse, is also quite informative. And I think we're probably going to talk about AI a little bit later, but it is it's an emerging place. And I'll be honest with you, the regulators have fallen behind in being able to approve and adopt the technology in their frameworks. So.
Okay. And you're right. I think, well, I'm going to skip to another question because you have all touched on this a little bit, but I commented on my my Apple Watch, and I think more and more people are wearing things like this. What role do you see wearable devices playing in the future of healthcare? Anybody? And instead of me kind of asking, is there somebody there that, Colin, I see you smiling.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so it's funny. first of all, I think where it gets really interesting here is there's lately been a little bit of backlash around some of this wearables. And I say that because imagine trying to tell your mom or dad, hey, by the way, you got to wear these 5 devices all the time because I want to track you, right? Like that's basically what we're asking them to do. Is like, well, would you do this? Right? Like, do I really want you to know like how many times I'm going to the washroom every day? Like, it's kind of like, I'm not really sure. And so actually we're running into that now. So yes, it's for your own good. And yes, I want you to be healthy. And maybe your doctor is even recommending this, right? But it borders on, okay, do I really, like, am I really going to do this? And so we're running into this wall now where, people are kind of going, well, maybe I don't want all this stuff, or maybe I want to only allow my physician to see this and not, my kids, right? So I think we have to be aware of that. But I do think that, yes, wearables have come a long, long way, right? Like before, the heart rate monitoring on some of these devices were a joke. Now you can get 5-point lead, EKGs on these things, right? So I think what's exciting is the accuracy of these devices are getting phenomenally, leveling up. And I think they can border now on clinical devices. And so that's really exciting to see. I think the ambient monitoring is actually going to be more important for the home. So this is where you have, things baked into the floor, things baked into the stove, or baked into the countertops, and monitoring how often whether or not you're eating properly and those kinds of things. That's going to be the future. And that's going to be, I'm really excited about that side of the wearables.
Actually, that makes a lot of sense. I know, I'm going to kind of relate a couple of stories, and it's that evasive side. We said to my dad, we need to start tracking you on Find My Friends because you go for these 1.5 hour walks and we need to know where you are. And he just kind of laughed at that. And then my neighbor will start going out for a walk and he says, oh, I'm connected with my kids on my watch and they see that I haven't exercised today. So now I've gotten a message saying, Dad, go out for your walk. And so maybe that's kind of the invasive side of things there. One of the questions here that's popped up, and I'm going to switch here, is Ron has asked, where would you recommend a young health tech company go to market first? So the US, Canada, other countries, and maybe why? Is there somebody that wants to answer that, feels that they could? Colin went right away on mute.
No, I spoke last time, so I'll let someone else answer first.
Yeah. David, do you want to answer this? And you know what, you might have a different opinion too.
So we deal with a lot of folks that are deploying technology into the US, and the model there is a little different than Canada. Obviously, most of the hospitals are for profit. A lot of what drives technology adoption is actually insurance payments and whatnot. So if the insurer is probably not willing to pay for it, it could be more difficult in getting your device or your technology adopted. The other thing is the ASCs, or the ambulatory surgery centers, are a much bigger thing in the United States than they are here. And this is taking traditional outpatient types of procedures, arthroscopies, colonoscopies, MRIs, et cetera, that they're taking them out of the hospital and putting them into these surgery centers. I think you used to see it, sort of the plastics where, guys doing plastic surgery, et cetera, were in these ASCs because, it's more very elective. But now we're starting to see critical care type things going into these ASCs. And so that's a different model. And the insurance reimbursement drives some procedures to that model, actually. And so I think you have to look at what it is you're trying to deliver, and where is your biggest chance for success and adoption, really. And it could be in the US, it could be here in Canada. The other thing is, I think one other difference is most of the hospitals in the US look at care as a end-to-end model. So they're looking at total cost of patient care. Whereas I think in the Canadian system, we still find a lot of siloed budgeting systems. So, I always talk about there was a doctor in Ottawa who developed this amazing scalpel, but it was more expensive But on the positive side, it made cleaner cuts, had better patient outcomes, faster recovery. But because the folks that were going to save all the money in the recovery cycle had no input on buying a more expensive scalpel, it just was never adopted, or it had limited adoption in Canada. Whereas in the US and other total healthcare models, it was adopted because they saw the downstream benefits. So those are, that's another, I guess, viewpoint to take on how you're going to get your technology implemented and adopted.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. Before I kind of ask, Lan, I see your hand is up, so go ahead.
Hi, David, Colin. I just have a question. When you read in the news about the healthcare cost is getting rising as fast as it's almost impossible for the government to manage it appropriately. And I wonder, do you see there's a also equivalent trend of in the health tech using technology for healthcare management or preventive management, so that the people at home and family, they can actually have access to some of the tool that they can help them to monitor or to predict or to manage their own healthcare, so that it would really in a way help relieve the pressure on the healthcare system.
Oh, interesting question. Is it okay, Kelly, if I take a shot?
Yeah, I was gonna say, go ahead.
So, so preventative care works really well on paper, and then usually fails on implementation. And the reason why I say that is all of us should be exercising more, eating more greens, eating less red meat. Like, we all know this, and yet 90% of us don't do anything, right? And there's plenty of evidence to say, and in our face to say all the benefits of why we should. So so it's really hard, is what I'm saying, to do preventative care and to get people who are normally healthy or believe that they're healthy to do something to further their own health, right? I mean, I know Lauren's probably thinking about this, but like smokers, right? We have plenty of evidence to say smoking is terrible, and we have wonderful smoking cessation programs, but trying to motivate someone to quit smoking is quite difficult. So all I'm saying is, usually what happens in this space is it becomes more of an exercise in behavioral science than it does an app, right? Just because the app tells me I should get up and walk, is that really going to motivate me to go walk? Well, small part of the population, it might. But for the majority, after like a week, it probably gets really annoying. I'm going to turn off the alarm, right? So preventative care is definitely an interesting market, but there's, first of all, not a lot of money being spent on it right now, other than maybe in some parts of the US, as David pointed out, because they understand the total cost of care a bit more. But it's more to do with, maybe you could find a pocket of people who are motivated to get involved in their care. Maybe people who have a couple of chronic conditions, right? Who might be more receptive to the idea of being on a specific type of diet or a specific kind of exercise regimen to keep themselves out of the hospital. But in general, this is an area that I think is still very, very much evolving. It's a tough area to be in right now as an entrepreneur, but hey, a tough area also means that there's opportunity here. It's just you have to find the right kind of targets in order to get that up, to realize that kind of opportunity.
Yeah. Lauren, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, maybe just to build on it. So definitely agree with Colin's points, and to share some examples. Like there is a lot of work, and especially if to reflect on the Ontario context, through Ontario Health, to fund a number of digital health opportunities. So that kind of one area in the technology space. And we have seen, so as one example with the hospital, we sent patients oximeters and had them support COVID remote monitoring from home, and the uptake was great. To Colin's point around time frame, it's one of those, you only have to do it for a couple of weeks, so it's easy to get people involved, but if it was over a longer term, that might become more challenging. But I think the key piece is that really going back to the importance of blending people with technology. So in a lot of these programs, you also need people to actually be able to follow up with patients and check in on how are they doing, or are you complying with what's expected from a technology perspective. So it can't always just be the technology solution, but needs to have the corresponding operational supports to be able to really be effective, and especially when it comes to things like that patient compliance piece and prevention in the home.
Lan, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think, that definitely, I know it's challenging, but I've been doing some research work in one of the projects that I was involved quite a number of years ago. And one of the issue as a person, right, living in Ontario, you always have challenge of accessing your own medical record. The doctor, the dentist, the pharmacist, the chiropractors, your eye doctor, the whole issue of data doesn't belong to you, are not integrated, and therefore it creates quite a challenge from a person to really understand your health and your being, and being able to actually understand what are some of the things that you should be paying attention to. And given myself, I'm pretty technology savvy. I can do a lot of research, but on the other hand, I thought that it could be with technology, and depend how easy to be used, can actually be helpful for people, that they can use the information and the data to understand better of their own health in a plain language, right? So that they can say, okay, if this is happening, I should be watching out what I eat, or whatever, right? And that it seemed to be, not being paid so much of attention. It's really depend on, like Colin, you just said, of the individual, whether they are motivated to do it, right? Given the fact that more and more consumers are very savvy, you can see that from the COVID, from the pandemic, people are much more comfortable to order online, right? Much more comfortable to order Uber. I wonder if there is opportunity for a startup to really start looking into this area and come up with some app or something that they can actually help consumer to be able to manage their health in a much more easier, but also more effective. Just my thought.
Colin, I was going to say, Colin, you might even be able to touch on this, but I think this goes back to your whole security issue too.
Well, it does, but I think to answer Lam, you're not wrong, and I think, and many companies have tried to do and are doing things in this space, right? The issue is that until something's wrong, a lot of people aren't really super active in their own health. And now it changes based on like risks, right? If I know I have my family has a history of a certain disease, then I'm a bit more motivated. But if you ask the average Canadian or average American, hey, if I can get you all your health data and then give it to you, would you want it? And everyone will go, yeah, of course I want it. Like, why wouldn't I want my own health data? And great. Okay, what are you going to do with it? And then it's crickets. Like, what are you going to do with this data? Right? Are you going to eat better? Are you going to, do? So the issue is that it goes back to, there is a certain small portion of our population that is motivated to do something and is motivated to learn more about their own health and become more self-aware. But for most of us, it's more like, I just want to run. You know what? I'll go out on my bike, and that's enough for me. And I'll try not to eat the big portion of dessert. That's, other than that, do I really want to know my latest, whatever test? Well, maybe if I ever needed to go to the hospital, but for the most part, I'm not super interested in getting that lab data. And that may change as, maybe healthcare costs go up or down. That may change in the US if now my premiums are tied to having this data, but really, there's been a lot of entrepreneurs that have gone into this area, frankly, and a lot of them have not gotten very far because it is so tough to get to scale and to get really significant revenues from this one particular zone. So it's actually to do more with human motivation. Again, back to that behavioral science comment I made before, rather than anything to do with the technology or security or anything like that.
That's interesting.
Okay. David, you kind of said, maybe we can touch on this a little bit, but what role are you seeing artificial intelligence and machine learning playing in healthcare? So maybe I'll direct this to you, David.
Well, I think, AI and machine learning come in kind of two flavors. One is call it a fixed algorithm approach, where there's an algorithm that takes data and drives an outcome. The other one is a machine learning approach where the data is changing the algorithm as it's received. The AI fixed algorithm scenario, the regulators are, I think, able to manage that. It's much like having a predicate medical device where, they talk about predicate algorithms. So if you've got an algorithm that's proven to work in the medical space, then you can utilize that algorithm. The machine learning and adaptive or changing algorithms, the regulators are still working on trying to figure out how to regulate it. There's an interesting, I think the US, Canada, and the UK came up with good machine learning practices for medical device development guiding principles. So you'll find that on the Health Canada website and on the FDA website in the UK. But that's as far as they've come. They've talked about a framework. They're still not sure how to regulate it and approve devices that adapt using the real-time data, if you will. So all I would say there is it's a cautionary tale of going into a device that is utilizing that type of technology. You may find it impossible almost to get it approved, depending on what it is in today's world. Now, having said that, the regulators are trying to rush to catch up, but it's a time to market issue. So,
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Colin, were you going to add to that?
I was just going to add, yeah, like I wrote about this recently, but AI went from being the boogeyman to being like a welcomed partner in the span of like a year, right? Because before the pandemic, AI was seen as the enemy in both in healthcare and around other industries, where it was going to take away jobs, right? It was going to replace doctors and do all these things, and people were like, I don't want that. But now with the crisis of staffing and everything, AI is now seen as a helper.
Mm-hmm.
And I think smart companies are realizing AI is not meant to actually replace people, although it may down the road, but really it's meant to take away a few hours of the mundane job from somebody that person doesn't want to do that anyways. And so if an AI can do this, it just frees them up to do something else. And especially today with fewer staff doing more things, that's actually a big benefit. If you can take one little task off my plate today, I'm in, right? And you're using AI ML to do it, awesome. All I care about is Mary's free now and she can do some other jobs. Or you know what? I'm going to be able to keep Mary because she's not going to burn out because I'm asking her to do 2 jobs. So I definitely think there's been a shift away from like AI becoming your doctor to AI just helping with maybe some administrative stuff. Maybe it's doing some alert monitoring of all the devices in a particular ward. It's this kind of AI that's really, making big strides in healthcare at the moment.
Excellent. Lauren, yourself, you want to add to that?
Yeah, just one thing to build even another lens beyond the efficiency piece is I think there's a lot of great power of AI. So I had mentioned earlier the concept of a deterioration index, which you can monitor patients' various vitals and be able to flag earlier than a person may even notice that there's a need to go and kind of meet with this patient and assess and come up with interventions. So I think the power for actually improving patient care beyond the efficiency piece is really something that is kind of a value that's brought to the table. So that being one piece. Another example is in the diagnostics world. So one thing is a lot of movement towards digital pathology and being able to actually look at images and suggest certain things that might not even be detectable to the pathologist, but can be mapped based on being able to look at a number of other related samples if it's a really unique sort of case. So there's a lot of great value in terms of how it actually translates back to positive patient outcomes.
That's really exciting there. David, you had just mentioned the regulatory frameworks, and Doris is asking if it's possible to share the links to that. If you can't find them now, maybe I'll get them from you and I can send them out as well.
Yeah, I don't have them at my fingertips, but I'll pass it back to you, Kelly, so you can distribute
Okay.
it. It is available on the on all of the public websites in those 3 countries, but I'll still give you the link.
Perfect. That's great. I'll do 2 more questions here. So Ron has asked, given the changing demographics, the growing challenges for hospitals to deliver quality healthcare, and the importance of empowering people to better manage their own health, how is the mindset in the medical community changing to meaningfully improve outcomes with more technology-based solutions and domain specialists? Is there anybody willing to take that question? Colin?
Yeah, okay. So couple, maybe deconstructing that a little bit. I think one thing I would remove from that statement would be, I think there is a focus on outcomes 100%. And I think there is more recognition now that we need to be more outcomes focused than we need to be activity focused, right? In the US, this is called value-based care, right? So instead of measuring and reimbursing people based on how many times a patient comes in to see you, now I'm going to get reimbursed based on how healthy I keep you, right? So there's definitely a focus on outcomes. However, I will say that healthcare is recognizing that not all paths to improving outcomes involves technology. A lot of it involves people, and a lot of it involves motivation. How can I motivate your family to take a little bit more of a proactive approach to caring for you as an individual, and things like that, which maybe technology plays a role, but it's not the technology that is the solution. So I think there definitely is a shift. It's been really slow, frankly. And here in Canada, it's been slow, but it's growing and it's gaining momentum, where we're now focusing a lot more on community health programs, population health programs, and things like that, trying to keep populations healthy. But I think there's always been a focus on outcomes. I just think it's sort of shifted from, I guess you can say, the importance. I think doctors and clinicians and hospitalists have always cared about making sure that their patients are healthy. But now there's added financial incentive to do that as well, which sounds a little perverse to say, but it's finally there, and we're definitely going to see a shift towards more of that down the road. But it's going to be slow.
Okay, thanks, Colin. Anybody else want to add to that?
I was going to say a specific example that we are working with one of our clients on is, and back to Colin's comment about financial incentive. In the US, hospitals perform pressure injury evaluations when patients come in. So they're looking for bed sores or any hint of them. And if the patient has no bed sores when they come into the hospital, but develop them while they're staying in the hospital, the insurers will not reimburse the hospital for any care related to those pressure injuries. So there are devices out there that are measuring pressure on mattresses in hospital beds. There are other devices that are, it's like for grillers out there, it's telling you when to turn the meat over. In this case, it's turn the patient over to avoid pressure injuries. So there are, I guess it's doing more with less, because if you think about it, nurses can't be checking every 5 minutes to see, is the patient developing a pressure injury? Whereas if the technology can inform them, hey, you need to intervene here, then you get a better, you can do more with less, I guess is the best way to describe it. So, that's just a simple example of financial motivation, doing more with less, and employing technology to get there.
Okay. I'm going to leave with one last question here, but what I'd like to do before I pose this question is just thank you. Thank Vaughan Economic Development for partnering with us on the Lunch and Learn, and thank you to everybody for joining us. If you're interested in attending a peer group, reach out to myself and we would love to see you. Our next Lunch and Learn we're aiming for June 8th on the the future of financial tech. But what I would like to do is throw out this question here. With the changes or trends that you've been seeing, how do you feel technology will change the future of healthcare, and what technologies are you most excited about that you're seeing in healthcare? Lauren, I'm going to start with you.
Sure, sounds great. So I think overall, just the increasing accessibility of different types of technology for people to promote health and help them to stay healthy. It is becoming more affordable, although probably not affordable for most, and especially kind of vulnerable populations who need it. But I think just the trend towards that piece is really great. And overall, I think it's just a way to keep people engaged. So whether they're in their homes or in the hospital, new ways to look at things. And then I think really advancing that kind of monitoring and artificial intelligence to, again, kind of complement workflows, but help to improve efficiency so that our providers can be able to really focus on the patient-to-patient interactions and be armed with the best data to help inform better care.
Thank you. David, yourself, what are you most excited about? How do you feel things are going to change?
I think the three things that are the most exciting, number one, wearables and the ecosystem that's being developed around that. Digital visualization, back to, I think Lauren touched upon it. How can you use advanced optics to diagnose things or look for, assistive surgical items. And the last thing is obviously robotics and assistive devices. Some are, I'll call them poor man's robotics in some cases, some are full robotics, but they get a faster, better outcome in a surgical situation, if used correctly. So those are the three things I think that, from a technology perspective that really, gets, everyone excited.
Thank you. I see that some of those things are really important and very interesting as we move forward. Colin, yourself.
Yes, lots of technologies I get excited about. But some of the ones I'm excited about that I'm excited for clinicians is ambient clinical voice. So this is the ability to enter things into the chart by just speaking into the void and then having the computer listen and enter that for them. So they don't have to sit there and type in front of a computer. They can spend more time with the patient. That's exciting. All the stuff around care at home is exciting. But also I'm excited for the entry of some of these bigger tech titans into the healthcare space, the Amazons of the world, the Walmarts of the world, the Walgreens of the world, getting into the healthcare space and really turning on in the head traditional healthcare. So I think that's pretty exciting, and I'm excited for that development, especially from an access point of view. I think Lauren mentioned it, the equity of health and making sure that everyone has access to care. A Walmart reaches way more places than any hospital can. And how can we leverage that, right? And how can we take advantage of that? Amazon can deliver anything to anybody. How can we leverage that for healthcare? So I'm excited about those kinds of things.
No, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I know it's 1 o'clock here. Maureen has actually thrown a question in the chat. And so I'm wondering whether you have a minute to answer this, but she works with healthcare startups, and she says she's always disappointed, but not surprised that they seem to turn to the US market for their business success because of barriers to adoption in Canada's healthcare system. In healthcare and biotech, it seems like we're exporting our innovation and talent. What can we do to grow these companies in Canada, or is it a non-issue? And is this a question you can answer?
Oh, this is a good one. I don't mind sticking around and answer this one, and maybe Lauren will disagree with me, but so my operating theory has always been, if you want to be a $5 million company, stay in Canada. You want to be a $50 million company, you got to go to the US. Now, that's nothing to say that being a $5 million company is not a great thing. It's just the size of our market. It's just a factor of the number of people and the amount of money we spend on healthcare. It's actually less to do with our structure of the healthcare system and more about the size of it, right? So are we exporting our expertise? I would say yes, but I don't think it's truly exporting it. What I mean by that is, just from my history, I've worked for a number of companies that have been based here in Canada, but have the predominant amount of business that they were generating was from the US, but the jobs were here. So in my mind, I think that's actually a good thing. I actually like that, where the jobs are here, the innovation's happening here. They're just happen to be making their money by selling into the United States rather than into Canada right now. And I think that's okay. I think that form of export is a good export. Sure, it does mean that a lot of our devices do get bought by like companies like Medtronic and Stryker, which are all US based. But again, I think that's an okay thing, because what happens with the money that those entrepreneurs make? They're plowing it right back into their next startup. And so you know, at the surface, I know it doesn't seem that great. We're like, oh, like why isn't the innovation being adopted here in Canada, or why isn't it here? I think eventually it will be. And as long as the money comes back here, as long as the jobs are here, I think we're doing okay. I will answer the question directly this way, though. There is a problem with the way Canadian healthcare organizations are funded, that it actually disincentivizes them to adopt newer technology. And that's just a function of how the budgets work, right? The federal and the provincial governments dole out the money based on existing operations. And so what we've done in Canada is hamstring hospitals from adopting innovation, because we're forcing them to say, well, I've allotted my budget based on what I spent last year. And so if I adopt any new technology, it's got to do exactly what an existing technology does. So if you want to, I don't have any money to implement a new thing unless it's a special project or a special fund from the government. So I think our government we need to seriously look at, can we carve out parts of the healthcare budget to be dedicated to adoption of new innovation technologies here in Canada?
Anybody else want to add to that? Lauren, you're just nodding because I think you agree with. And then Maureen, that seems to answer your question. David, do you have anything to add to that, or?
Well, one model that has been massively successful is in Israel. And they have a website called Startup Nation. And if you go on there, now it covers all types of startups, but there is a massive focus on medtech. The thing that really, and we use it to look for potential customers, amongst other things, but it tells you the amount of funding that is available to those startups in that ecosystem is massive. Like, companies with $20–50 million raised, early stage, you know, even sometimes in cases even before startup or before prototype. Sorry. So I think that's another, you know, barrier, is I don't see the same investment from Canadian sources. And maybe it's helping, or happening, but I don't see it. You know, we're talking to a customer on the West Coast. Their funding is coming from China, believe it or not. So we're, you know, they've got a lot of money, but you know, these are environments that are willing to make those investments. And you know, I'm just not seeing the same level of investment coming out of Canadian sources.
Thank you. Julie even put in here, and I'll send out that link, Julie, as well. I appreciate that. If you're interested in learning more about kind of how they're collaborating here, there's this link. So I will definitely send that out. So thank you. Oh, and there's even another. Does anybody have any other questions before we go? Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us today. Thank you very much, Lauren, David, and Colin, for all of your insights and your answers. I think there was a lot of really good information for everybody, and we appreciate that. Julie, thank you very much for taking the time to help put the panelists together, and to the Vaughan Economic Development for working together with us on this. We look forward to seeing you in June at our Financial Tech, the Future of Financial Tech. Everybody have a fantastic day, stay warm, and hopefully we don't get too much more snow. So have a great day, everybody. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.